The ground beneath Norris Geyser Basin is rising again, and the last time it did this, scientists spent nearly a decade trying to figure out why. In July 2025, GPS instruments and satellite radar picked up something the monitoring network had not recorded in more than 20 years. The Earth along the northern rim of the Yellowstone caldera had begun to lift. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone standing on the boardwalk would feel beneath their feet. But the instruments did not miss it. By the end of 2025, a section of ground roughly the size of the city of Chicago had risen about 1.5 inches, and buried beneath that number is a fact that changes what the number means. The last time this exact patch of ground moved in this exact pattern, scientists concluded the most likely cause was magma accumulating 9 miles below the surface. That was in 1996. The episode ran for 8 years, and now, with barely a whisper of coverage outside specialist circles, it has started again. This is not a rumor. It is not a misread instrument. The Yellowstone Volcano Observatory confirmed it. The Norris Uplift Anomaly is back. The official alert level for Yellowstone is still green. Carry that thought with you, because by the time this is over, you will understand exactly what green means and what it does not. Norris Geyser Basin sits roughly 28 miles north of Old Faithful, and it is unlike anything else in the park. It is the hottest hydrothermal area in Yellowstone. Not warm, not geologically elevated. Scientifically recorded at 459 degrees Fahrenheit, just over 1,000 feet below the surface, which is the highest subsurface temperature ever measured anywhere in the park. The water that feeds its springs and geysers is largely acidic, and the ground itself changes from week to week. Features that have been quiet for decades abruptly boil over. Springs change color. New vents open in the forest. The basin has had evidence of thermal activity for roughly 115,000 years, and it has never really calmed down. Steamboat Geyser lives here, the tallest geyser on Earth, capable of blasting a column of boiling water 300 feet into the air. And somewhere inside this system, beginning in mid-T25, something started pushing the ground upward. It pushed steadily enough that by October 2025, Satellite's radar confirmed it. It pushed long enough that a swarm of more than 100 earthquakes clustered near the anomaly between September and December 2025, the largest of them magnitude 2.7. More than 4.7 million people walked through Yellowstone in 2024. Nearly 4.8 million came in 2025. Hundreds of thousands of them passed within walking distance of the exact area, now being watched by GPS sensors and radar satellites for signs of continued movement. But here is the detail that tells the real story. The ground moving at Norris is not new. What is new is that we can see it clearly enough to understand what it might mean and what it has meant before. The zone of deformation is called the Norris Uplift Anomaly. It is an area along the north rim of the Yellowstone caldera, just south of Norris Geyser Basin, and it has a documented history that spans almost 30 years of direct observation. In 1996, that same area began to rise, slowly, incrementally, measurably, and it kept going for 8 years, ultimately lifting the ground by nearly 5 inches before subsiding. Scientists at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory published their assessment, what drove it. The most likely cause, they concluded, was the accumulation of magma, approximately 14 kilometers beneath the surface, or just under 9 miles down. Not magma at the surface, not an eruption, not even an eruption precursor in the conventional sense, but magma moving, a body of molten or partially molten rock shifting position deep inside the earth and exerting pressure upward through the rock above it. The ground behaved like the skin of a drum being pushed from below, tightening and rising as pressure built from underneath. Then it stopped. After 2004, the same area subsided by about 3 inches and went mostly quiet for a decade. Then from 2013 to 2020, deformation returned, but this time it was thought to be driven by something shallower, the accumulation and release of hydrothermal fluids, rather than magma movement. The ground lifted, then fell, then lifted again in irregular pulses as superheated water under pressure moved through the rock and released. After 2020, the area quieted again, and then July 2025 arrived. GPS stations on the northwest side of the caldera began recording movement. The ground was spreading outward from a center point between Norris Geyser Basin and Madison Junction, a sign consistent with uplift. When the ground rises, it also expands laterally, like bread dough being pushed from beneath. By the end of 2025, instruments showed approximately 1.5 centimeters of uplift since July, consistent with the pace and pattern of the 1996 episode. The satellite interferometry data, radar images taken from space at different times and compared for ground movement, showed roughly 2 centimeters of rise along the North Caldera Rim between October 2024 and October 2025. The USGS published the map. The data is public. The scientists who analyzed it were careful and precise. Michael Poland, the scientist in charge at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, confirmed it plainly. The new was back. Now understand what Yellowstone actually is before you decide what any of this means. Yellowstone sits above one of the largest active volcanic systems on Earth. The caldera visible today, a depression roughly 30 by 45 miles, was formed approximately 631,000 years ago, when an eruption of almost incomprehensible scale emptied a subsurface magma reservoir and the ground. Above it collapsed into the void. Prior to that eruption, there was another 1.3 million years ago. And before that, 2.1 million years ago, an event considered among the largest volcanic eruptions in known geologic history, one that scattered ash across most of the western half of North America. These are not myth. They are in the rock record, and they have been dated. If you are enjoying this breakdown of what is actually happening at Yellowstone right now, consider subscribing. New deep dives like this one go out regularly. What Yellowstone has not done is erupt in the way most people imagine when they hear the word volcano. The last significant volcanic activity was a lava flow on the Pitchstone Plateau about 70,000 years ago. The last major caldera-forming supereruption was 631,000 years ago. The system has been doing something far quieter since then, breathing. The ground across the caldera rises and falls over years and decades as magma and hydrothermal fluids shift beneath the surface. In some years, it goes up by several centimeters. In others, it subsides. The caldera's main floor has been sinking at roughly 2 to 3 centimeters per year since around 2015. While the caldera subsides, the Norris Uplift Anomaly has now rejoined the system from the North Rim, rising on its own separate clock, driven by its own separate subsurface process. 2 different areas of the same system moving in different directions at the same time. That is the picture as of early 2026. Here is what makes Norris itself a particular focus regardless of the uplift. On April 15, 2024, while Yellowstone was in its seasonal closure and the boardwalks were empty, instruments at Norris Geyser Basin recorded something no instrument had ever captured there before: a hydrothermal explosion on Porcelain Terrace. Not large by any measure, it left a crater about 10 feet across in the silica deposits and disrupted the surrounding ground. But the USGS published a scientific paper confirming it was the first instrumentally detected hydrothermal explosion in Yellowstone history. No precursors were detected before it happened. It simply detonated, and had the park been open, had visitors been walking that terrace, as they regularly do in peak season, no warning system would have protected them, because no warning system existed that could see it coming. 3 months later, on July 23, 2024, a hydrothermal explosion at Biscuit Basin near Old Faithful erupted without precursors, and hurled a plume of boiling water, mud, and rock fragments between 400 and 600 feet into the air, while visitors ran from the boardwalk. No one was injured. No one was injured in April either, because the park was closed. These are not framed here as signs of eruption. The USGS does not frame them that way. They frame them as demonstrations of an underappreciated hazard, the hydrothermal explosion, which is distinct from volcanic eruption and follows its own rules. Superheated water held under pressure by the weight of rock above it. When the seal breaks, when the pressure shifts, the water flashes to steam almost instantaneously, and the expansion is violent and immediate. Mary Bay, on the northern shore of Yellowstone Lake, is the largest known hydrothermal explosion crater on Earth. It is 1.5 miles across. It formed roughly 13,800 years ago. In 1989, Pork Chop Geyser in Norris Geyser Basin exploded without warning and threw boulders more than 200 feet in every direction. Visitors were present. No one was killed. The variables that determine whether people live or die in an event like that are distance and luck in almost equal measure. Now hold all of that beside this. The Norris Uplift Anomaly is active again. The same area, the same pattern, matching the geometry and pace of 1996 to a degree that the scientists tracking it called the comparison clear. More than 100 earthquakes clustered near the anomaly in the final months of 2025, and Norris Geyser Basin, which sits directly above or immediately adjacent to the uplifting zone, is the hottest, most chemically volatile, most dynamically unstable hydrothermal area in the entire park. These facts do not predict an eruption. The USGS is explicit about that. What the uplift indicates in their words is magmatic activity about 14 kilometers beneath the surface, and it does not represent an increased chance of eruption. Read that again. The most likely cause of the ground rising is magma moving, and the scientists who monitor the system say that movement does not mean eruption is more likely. That is the state of the science. Honest about what the instruments show, and equally honest about the limits of what that showing means for the timeline of any future event. But the honest version requires one more sentence. Nobody knows what the normal behavior of this system looks like over centuries or millennia. The monitoring network that caught the current uplift did not exist in comprehensive form during the 1996 episode. The infrasound sensors that detected the April 2024 hydrothermal explosion were installed only months before it happened. We are building the tools to see the system in real time while the system is already in motion. What we see depends entirely on what instruments we have installed, and the instruments keep improving. In 2003, the last time Norris Geyser Basin showed extreme thermal disruption before the current cycle began, ground temperatures in the western part of the basin reached the boiling point of water. Geysers that had been dormant for years reactivated. A new linear series of fumaroles about 75 meters long emerged in a forested area near Nymph Lake, venting from ground that had never vented before. Steamboat Geyser erupted twice in the spring of that year after having been largely quiet since 1991. Scientists responding to the disturbance called it unlike anything observed there in the prior 2 decades of monitoring, and it resolved without eruption, but not before demonstrating, once again, that Norris does not behave like any other thermal area on Earth. The USGS monitors the system with GPS networks, satellite radar, seismometers, and temperature sensors. They publish everything. They hold monthly updates. They call the current alert level green, and they have not changed it. What they cannot tell you, what no one can tell you, is where inside the system's long cycle we are standing right now. Whether the 2025 uplift runs for a year and stops like the brief signals of 2020 to 2022, or whether it runs for another 8 years like the 1996 episode, or whether it does something that has no precedent in the short record of direct observation. The instruments are better than they have ever been. The system is being watched more closely than at any point in history. The scientists are precise and careful, and they do not overstate. And the ground at Norris is still rising. What changes the alert level? How many more earthquakes cluster near the anomaly before the classification shifts? And what does it mean that the most volatile hydrothermal basin in the park sits directly above the zone that is now lifting, in a region that nearly 4.8 million people visited the year the uplift began, in a system whose deepest history is written in ash deposits that once covered half a continent? The satellites are still watching. The GPS stations are still recording. The infrasound sensors at Norris are still listening. And somewhere 9 miles beneath the boardwalk, where tourists stand to photograph Steamboat Geyser against the Wyoming sky, the rock is still under pressure. The alert is green, the ground is still moving. Subscribe if you want to follow what happens next.